Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to WooStream, bringing Willamette to you. My name is Abby Kale, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement. Today's conversation features Sandi Collins Hildreth, class of 1993, who serves as the Global Director of Human Resources for Wieden Kennedy, the world's largest remaining independent advertising agency with over 1,500 employees in offices in Portland and Shanghai. In this role, she manages a global team of people experts and support staff while also doing her best to foster a company culture that prides itself on a lack of corporateness. Our conversation today will touch on topics around current trends in employee-employer relationship management, support and flexibility in a new work-life reality, finding balance, and being mindful of self-care. We'll talk about all of this shortly, but for now, join me in welcoming Sandi Hildreth. Hey, Sandi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Abby. Happy to be here.
All right. So we have about 30 minutes to kind of chat through some of these topics. So why don't we dive in and get started?
Great.
So a general overview of current topics and trends in people resource spaces. It's been a hectic and disruptive 2 years for most working folks. Can you speak a bit about what you've seen in your role in general HR spheres and what you people are talking about?
Yeah, so the last 2 years have been a blur for most HR folks. A lot of the heavy lifting has fallen onto these teams. I just read a New York Times article recently with the headline, "Your head of HR is now basically your school nurse," which really sums up, a lot of the things that we've been tasked to solve or be really deep experts on for the last 2 years. So COVID, everything about COVID, vaccines, masks, mandates, boosters, religious and medical exemptions, office deep cleans, employee burnout, mental health, the Great Resignation, and then most recently, return to office. So that's all of that for the last 2 years on top of all of our people responsibilities. So it's been a lot. But this year, I would say what people are talking about is still return to the office, hybrid work. That's like a huge topic right now. Mental health, which is a critical topic, and then whole person wellness. So I know that's what my teams and then many of my colleagues in other companies are deeply talking about right now.
Yeah. Well, as you touched on the hybrid and office work environment, as we've all have been in hybrid or fully remote work for a few years, how has this transition or not back to the office and traditional workspaces, environments, and schedules gone for your company and for other employers that you're chatting with?
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this plays out. I think this is going to be really an interesting space to watch. The past 2 years has pushed a lot of questions forward on what and where is work. What and where is company and work culture? And so, many companies have already tried to create some mandates in some form of return to the office with employees. And what you're seeing is employees have been pushing back really hard. So, this has been in the news a lot, but there's been many huge corporations who've had to change their return to office policy multiple times just in the last 6 months, just because there's been such resistance from employees. And I have not seen any company have it completely figured out yet, including mine. And, the pandemic was really a great equalizer. I'm talking specifically about professional services. So real inclusive hybrid work is going to be really have a lot of speed bumps because it's just hard and complex. I think technology is going to play a huge role in how some of this hybrid work can work for organizations. But overall, it's going to be hard. I don't think it's going to be easy. My company's treating it like an experiment. So for us, we're taking the stance of simply returning to what is not the future. So we're really trying to evolve what our work culture is and leave room to develop over time as the world continues to keep moving, as it just changes over and over and over. So we're really focusing on going from how and when people need to be in the office to what people need from the office to create the best work. So that right now, that's our stance, and we're trying to keep the flexibility there.
Yeah, you hear people talk about I want things to go back to normal, but what normal as we knew it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. And so it's how do we pivot and transition to this new set of normal environmental things we're dealing with.
Exactly.
I've seen a lot of public discourse from TikTok and in news articles that highlights generational differences between workers and managers and their ethos around work and work-life balance. Can you speak to that a little bit and the different sensibilities coming into the workplace as we have younger workers and older managers who are sometimes in conflict on the importance of work and that flexibility?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of generational differences come up at work. I see it all the time. And it can be really easy to get into some monolithic stereotypes. But in terms of what we're talking about, and specifically about return to office, which I think is like probably the biggest topic that's on everybody's minds right now, I think it really comes down to where people are in their stages of life. And of course, some of those things are often going to line with what generation that they're in. So, for example, there may be people who are empty nesters, like boomers and some Gen Xers, who may want to be in the office because they're missing some human connection, or that's just how they've always worked and that's the way they want it to be. And often those are people that are in higher positions in the organization. So their own personal need to be back in the office is heavily influencing some of the return to office policies. Whereas there are other people in completely different life stages, such as possibly Gen Y, who are like busy raising children, who are looking for more flexibility in when and where they work. Right. For various reasons, daycare, school, et cetera. And then of course, there's the junior talent that just coming in, like the Gen Zs, and they're just starting their careers. They're looking to learn. How can they get that kind of on, is it important for them to be in the office to learn directly? So there's a lot of things that are happening that is going to make connected to generations that really are influencing how people are looking at return to office and where some of the friction is. And then you add on to that, there are a lot of groups that are not excited about coming back into the office, and particularly women, people of color who experience microaggressions and other not great things in the traditional workplace. The New York Times just did a really interesting article last week about that topic. So I think that's where some of the friction comes, is there is some projection of what a specific person wants to see the office be. All of these different stages of life, and then the increased autonomy and flexibility people have had for the last 2 years to kind of take that away. It's going to continue to be a really complex conversation.
Yeah. And for those that are watching, we will post the link to the New York Times article in the chat, along with some other resources a little bit later in the webinar, so you can have that, or you're also welcome to reach out to alumni@willamette.edu and we can share those resources post-webinar with you as well. Over the past couple of years, we've seen a transition to a more holistic and wellness-focused approach to supporting employees. How does that show up at your work or in other spaces that you know about?
Yeah, so whole person wellness is so incredibly important, and it's become even more so over these last 2 years. I don't think we can really I don't know if we can talk enough about like how these last 2 years has affected people. Burnout, stress, anxiety, a sense of not being in control during the pandemic, and now with a potential war. It's so much, and it's contributing to such a huge mental health crisis. And I think this is something that all employers really need to be focused on for their employees' well-being. For my company, and during the pandemic, one of the things that we thought about is we realized people were not taking any vacation days because there was no place to go. They felt weird just staying at home, not working, or they felt guilty that their coworkers were working and they weren't. So we made some really quick pivots where we're like, okay, we don't have a vacation policy right now. It's open. We're not counting anything. We made sure that there was a 3-day weekend in every single month. So every employee had 1 day off. And then we're traditionally closed. My company's traditionally closed between the Christmas and the New Year time period. We also added permanently now an additional week in the summer. So everyone had a full week off, just to kind of help with this sense of burnout and overwork. And then we're constantly reminding employees of what all of our mental health resources are. So, because we do have a lot of different options: counselors, EAPs, meditation apps, exercise classes, sound baths. There's just so many things that all organizations can be doing to help their employees. And then, and that's from a mental health standpoint, but from a whole person standpoint, we've really been trying to focus on what are some of the life pain points, that employees have. There's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you see the two bottom rungs are about basic needs. The last 2 years in particular, that has been very stressful for people. So what are those things that, my organization, any organization can be helping their employees with outside of providing a paycheck? And then there's the complexity of having a multi-generational workforce where those needs are very, very different for everybody. So for my company in particular, 80% of our workforce is Gen Y. So we've really tried to expand upon resources for parents, families, caregivers, and then financial wellness is a huge thing that we're focusing on this year. We just rolled out a student loan repayment program, which has gone over really well. I wish I would have had that when I had started. And then we've also provided all of our employees with access to certified financial planners. So there's so many different things that different organizations can be doing to help their employees. And I think it really cannot, the days of just having the bare bones, here are some medical benefits, I think those are over, because it's just a new ball game now.
Yeah. Well, I had a friend who did a career change this past year. And one of the questions that she was asking was about what are their holistic benefits. And the company that she hired on with, every month, they do 1 to 2 Fridays where the office is closed and their employees are encouraged to spend time with either friends or family or focusing on their mental health. So it's interesting and I think good news to see companies taking those things into consideration. And I really like the approach of that 1 week off in the summer, because it's when you're on vacation and you see emails, we try to unplug right during vacation, but it doesn't always happen. And so when you see emails come in, then you're pulled out of that state of mind and pulled right back into the work environment. So I think that's a really great idea.
Exactly. And I also love, that idea of having those days off where your friend works. But yeah, that's exactly right, Abby. Like, we were trying to figure out, because we'd seen during the holiday break, the number of emails just went to nothing, and you can spend time with your family and not think about work. I mean, we need to all recognize Americans are workaholics. And so to kind of force people to be like, everybody's off, the emails are going to go down to a trickle. That's really beneficial for people's mental health.
Yeah. Which I think is a good pivot into what do we mean when we're talking about work-life balance, and it's kind of a nebulous concept. Is it still even accurate? And what does flexibility mean in this new work reality?
Yeah, I am not a fan of the phrase work-life balance. I don't like it because it's really all just life, isn't it? And so the question is, how do you fit it all in? And there's a lot of stuff to fit in: work, family, kids, school, kids' sports, doctor's appointments, exercise, hobbies, caregiving, you name it. Everybody's life situations are different. And so I've never liked that phrase because it's just life. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a new show that just came out. I think it's on Apple TV. It's called Severance.
Okay.
And it's the concept is there's a company that's implanted chips into their employees' brains. So they have fully separated their work and their life. So the minute they walk into the building, they just think about work. When they leave the building, they have no idea what they did during the day. And then they're back to their life. And it's really disturbing. I find it a very disturbing concept because I don't think life and work should be separated. I mean, I learn something new every day at my work, and it would be terrible not to bring those things into my non-work life and vice versa. But I do think we have to figure out how all the pieces of our life work together. And I really strongly believe that organizations need to provide that flexibility to their employees to make sure that it can. As we've seen with the Great Resignation, employees are leaving in droves, and flexibility is going to have to be a key factor. For speaking for just from a professional services, the days of butts and seats and 9 to 5, they're gone. And there were not a lot of good things that happened in the pandemic, but that is the only one good thing I think that came out of it, is that realization of it doesn't have to be that way anymore. Right. And so you're seeing a lot of companies doing a lot more experimenting with flexible schedules. Even countries are doing, are trying out experiments on permanent 4-day work weeks. So I think there's going to be a lot of, if we can figure out how the hybrid thing works, I think there's going to be a lot of quick progression away from a 9 to 5 workday.
Right. Well, it's interesting looking. I have friends that work in various industries, and one of them was sharing a story recently with me about when she first started with her company, which is in a financial sector. They were required to be in their seats for 10 hours a day, whether you were working on something or not. They wanted to have that face time. And, there's been a little bit of push and pull as the old guard has worked to really try to rectify that, or at least find a new way. And they're seeing it with, they're finally getting it with some of the, the newer employees as they're coming in, which is good. But again, it goes back to that face time is that face time necessary when you can do the work from home aspect?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think, I think pre-pandemic, I think a lot of employers and managers felt they needed to see their employees working to make sure that they were working. And that's just not going to work anymore. I'm a huge believer in, we hired adults. Employees are adults. Right. We shouldn't treat them as children. We're not their parents. And we just need to, we need to know that they're going to get their work done. And it might be in a different time, or it might be at 10 o'clock at night, but, we shouldn't act like their parents.
Yeah.
And one thing we haven't talked about yet is which I also think is contributing to burnout, is that we're always living in an always on world. Right. So we can be reached in so many different ways. It's almost overwhelming, email, text, Slack, social media. It's just so much. What I think also contributing to some burnout is if managers are contacting employees outside of like the traditional work hours, there's this sense of needing to always be on and always responding immediately. And I think that is where employers can really help with like putting some guidelines around what are some no contact periods. Are there no emails after 7 o'clock or on holidays or on weekends? And I think, I know I use this feature on my email. There is a schedule send feature that I think probably most emails in Slack have, which is game changing. If you're someone who wants to work in the evenings, which is your choice, that doesn't mean that you need to be blowing up everybody else's inbox at that same time. So you could schedule it for, the next day or, the following week. And it's been, I have found that helpful. Our organization has found that helpful as well.
Yeah. I know one of the things for me is that self-care and that setting boundaries. My friends tease me that I'm the person that has a really hard time saying no, because I'm a people pleaser and a people person. And so I want to be able to be of help. And so it's that one of my goals for this year has been, how do I set boundaries for myself and make sure that I'm allowing myself time to really get the task done. Where if I'm in meetings constantly, I need time to act on those action plans. And so it's, but also it's that remembering to take a lunch break and to be mindful about how I'm getting the work done. Absolutely.
I mean, the last 2 years, especially since people haven't had to commute, they just felt like they needed to work longer. And because we've been in this Zoom culture, at least for me, I've just been in back to back Zoom. So when you get your work done, you get it done in the evenings or you get it done on the weekends. And that, again, it's just perpetuating this cycle of burnout. And so I do think that it is, employers have, a responsibility in this, but I think the employee also has a responsibility in setting some boundaries that are just not negotiable. If you need to take a lunch break, that is blocked off in your calendar and it can't be moved. If you have to make dinner for your family, or you have a standing, appointment, like there has to be some flexibility that's there. But the hard part, and as you kind of said, is you have to stick to those boundaries, and that's the slippery slope. How do we prioritize things? So for me, I'm with you. I worked nonstop every day for the last 2 years, and my boundaries this year is I'm not going to work on the weekends. Period. I'm just can't do it. So it's like, and I've stuck to it so far. It's working.
Yeah. Yeah. I know one of the things that my goals for 2022 is to, I sit down at the end of each day and review the day, prioritize for the next day, and even go so far as to calendaring out specific time for that, because I would find that I would get in the morning and have squirrel moments where I would focus on the latest email that came in. And then because I was worrying about the things for the next day, I wouldn't sleep very well. And so it's that, how do I set those boundaries? How do I set myself up? And I'm constantly learning new tools, and, we'll find that thing that will work for me to be most successful while still setting those boundaries. So it's,
that's, you're totally right. And, another thing that I've been doing, because I'm not working on my weekends, is I've set up my calendar, and I recognize I have a lot of flexibility in how my calendar is set up, but I'm setting up blocks of time that I can do some deep work, because I want to spend time with my family in the evenings, as I think most everyone else does. And it's been helping a lot, but again, there has to be a give and take from both the employee and the employer to make all of that work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, so as you mentioned before, it's, really, there's a lot of the Great Resignation, people are making transitions. What are some considerations for considering that work life? We want to talk about considerations for working people when considering that work-life balance that helps them to accomplish both. And we've talked about it being a candidate's market. Mm-hmm. If somebody's looking to do it, what are some things that they should take into consideration when they're changing companies?
Yeah. It's definitely a candidate's market right now. People are leaving organizations where there was a toxic culture, or managers that they didn't like, or frankly, organizations that are not being flexible. And so it's definitely a candidate's market. And so, what my advice would be, what are the values that you hold important? Whether it's you want a chunk of time off, maybe you want to work in an education standpoint, you can get your summers off, or, whatever is important to you, look for what organizations that emulate those same things. Sure. And then there are a lot of great sites out there. Recruiters are very good at what they do. And of course, they're going to try to sell you on an organization. But if you really want to know what it's like to work at an organization, there are a lot of sites that can help you do that sleuthing. So Glassdoor is one of them. Fishbowl is another one. And then during the interview process, ask all the questions. Ask them all. What are the benefits like? How flexible is flexible? What are the learning and growth opportunities? What are their diversity numbers? So yeah, there's a lot of things out there right now. But again, it is a candidates market for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that actually kind of rolls into a question that we got via the chat that asks, how would you recommend that students ask a potential employer about remote or hybrid work when they're interviewing or gathering information? Is that an okay thing to ask? Or
100%.
Are hiring managers including that when they post the position?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of this. I think it's going to, I think organizations really need to take a hard look on at what are the roles that need to be in the office and why. My organizations were looking at it in kind of three different buckets. So on-site, so who physically has to be on site to do their job. Facilities, reception, it's a small group of people. And then on the far spectrum, there's the fully remote, who could be 100% remote, do not need to come into the office ever. But the majority of the people, again, for my organization, are going to fall in this hybrid category. And sometimes they can come to the office, sometimes they don't. But just having a blanket, like everybody needs to be in the office. Really, does every role have to be in the office every day? So to answer that question, that is such a valid question that anybody should be asking anywhere that they're interviewing right now, to see how, that will truly tell you how flexible is flexible.
Yeah. No, that's great. And again, something that I agree, it's a valuable question to ask, and something that I don't know that I would have necessarily thought about a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
This came up in the Q&A, but also it kind of leads into our next point. But about resources that are available for folks that may work in smaller organizations that have one person or one person who's their people. And as someone who has been a high-level people person for the majority of your career, what resources or knowledge can you share with those in smaller organizations who are self-employed but need information about support on these topics?
Well, first of all, for all of those organizations who have one people person, I go hug that person because they took on a lot in the last 2 years by themselves. I was fortunate. I had a team of people, but there are so many resources. I could talk about this for a long time, but I promise you I won't. There are a lot of organizations to get help. Some of the big HR organizations, Shuram, World at Work. There are some amazing thought leaders that have amazing social feeds, like Josh Bersin and Adam Grant, Laura Schmidt, and then. People trends are constantly changing and updating. So I love to go to webinars and continue to learn. And there are some amazing, there are some providers out there who are putting on amazing content all the time. 15.5, Culture Amp, HRCI. There's so much. And then find a peer, either in your industry or in a similar one to talk to. It will make you feel less alone. And you'll also realize, people are dealing with some of those same concerns. I have some peers that I would talk to over the past years, and it was therapy. There were times when we would just call each other and be like, okay, are you dealing with this? Yes, I'm the same thing. Okay, how many times did you cry this week? Okay, I cried this many times this week. So it's like you just finding that person to ground you again, to be like, okay, we can all do hard things is so helpful. And then, the other thing is also just know your organization. So, if, reach out to all of these things to get the knowledge, and then you need to apply it to where you work. I think that's the know your employees and what they need. Send out surveys, talk to employees, find out what's important to them. And then more importantly, do something, action it. But there's lots of resources out there. I could talk about that for a long time.
Well, and I know that we've got a link to, we've got a couple of links that I'll post here shortly in the chat while we're getting to some questions. But Cindy, before we move into the general Q&A, is there anything else that we should consider? Is there anything that you want to circle back on that before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I just just really want to make sure that if anybody who's in a leadership role in the organization, just really realize how important mental health is right now, and try to put as many resources as you can there, because I think it's going to be really beneficial for retention of your employees in the long run.
Yeah. Well, so if you have a question, post it in the chat or the Q&A session, and we'll do our best to get to them before we need to sign off. But there was a question that came in that earlier you spoke about the evolution of culture in a hybrid environment. How do you measure your culture to understand how it has changed and how it shows up in the day-to-day?
Oh, that is such a good question. And I don't have a really good answer. I think for us, culture, so there are some organizations that are really focused on culture, and there are some organizations that aren't. My organization is really focused on culture, but what we've realized is culture is continually evolving. So the values that we hold might be evergreen, but the people who are coming in to the workforce are changing the culture every day. So I would say, we are doing inclusion surveys and engagement surveys as kind of tentpole moments to kind of gauge how employees are feeling about where they work. I think that is something that is a good way to measure how a culture is doing. But I also think retention rates is also a good way, or people staying, people enjoy what they're doing. So I think asking, surveying, looking at kind of your analytics to see, do you have a really high turnover rate? If you do, there might be something wrong.
Yeah. And how do you, we're hearing about, the young workforce and how they will have multiple jobs. And so with a group of folks coming in that we know there's going to be some movement, how do you dissect that? What is, when you're looking at retention, what is because of just normal workflow, and when there might be a problem?
Yeah, I think that's where exit interviews and exit surveys are really important. Even when someone's leaving an organization, you want them to leave with a positive experience of working there. And if they aren't having a positive experience, then that's important feedback to know what to change. And you're right, people are not staying in jobs for the long term anymore. Those days are over. But building an alumni network from former employees, you want them to have a positive experience, because eventually they might want to come back. We have a lot of boomerangers in my organization. So yeah, I think that's all important, but exit interviews, exit surveys are a key way to get that data.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, like maintaining that positive relationship, because even though they may move on, they may be recommending your company to the next great employee. And so absolutely, I think exit interviews are a great thing to implement. Another question that came in was, how is age diversity factored into your approach to DEI?
Oh, that's a good one.
Which is a great question also.
It is a good question. I mean, we're factoring everything into our EDI approach. And what's hard is the advertising industry in general is connected to culture, which is typically connected to youth. So my organization is very young in general. I would say the average age, I think our Portland office has the highest average age, which is about 36. It skews low 30s. So, we're just looking for the most interesting and diverse talent, regardless of age, gender, race, all of those things. So we don't put quotas on anything. But we're definitely looking for just different points of view.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we will be diving in a little bit more to the equity, diversity, inclusion conversation on Wednesday with Jonathan Mays, who's an alum from the grad school and focuses on that and how we can bring it more into the awareness more into the workplace. So it'll be, I'll add this question to our Wednesday conversation. Another question that came in is there something you wish more people tried to negotiate when being hired, especially when salary is not flexible? And I guess in terms of,
That is such a good question. Benefits are my favorite thing. So it's like, I'm seeing, here are some trends I'm seeing. And I'm seeing trends where, again, we're talking about generational workforces, not, a lot of these medical and benefit plans are just, they don't cater to all of the different needs. And so I maybe something that would be interesting to negotiate is a stipend that you can use for things that fall outside of the normal benefits. Something else I think would be interesting if your company doesn't have a robust learning development program is a stipend for professional growth and development, maybe a membership to an organization, or to get an executive coach. I think those would be some really interesting things to bring up during an offer negotiation.
Yeah. Well, and having the stipend for professional development or to join an organization that is within that sector, benefits the employee and the employer.
100%.
Making connections outside and building relationships. And
depending on the type of for HR people, there are certain certifications that you can get. And if that's something that you were interested in, and I'm sure there are other certifications for other careers, maybe that's another thing to negotiate is the education and the continuing education credits to be paid for by the organization.
Yeah. Just looking to see if there are any additional questions that come in. I know we've got a little bit more time, but Sandi, what so in addition to boundaries and I'm going to take the next question again. The question is transgendered individuals are often in need of different access to care than other employees. Many companies struggle to provide adequate care. What does your company do to ensure transgender individuals have access to proper benefits?
Yeah, that's such a good question. We've actually had several employees transition on our medical insurance. So we make sure that is fully covered. That's something that's really important to us. I do know that that is a need that a lot of medical plans need to expand the coverage. But that is something that's really, really important to us. So that is fully covered on our plan.
Yeah. I think we've got time for another question or two. Sandi, if you were to look ahead, what other areas aside from, what other resources should we be looking at in terms of, that mental health and boundaries? And we've talked about are there apps that you're aware of that have been helpful to your employees that might be good resources for folks to check out?
Yeah, we've had some, meditation apps, Calm, and I can't remember the other one's name, that have been helpful for some, not helpful for others. Everybody has a different way of how they do that. My recommendation is just have a varying different types of benefits that help mental health, because it's not all one size fits all. So some people will really get benefit from an app. Some people will get benefit from talking face to face with a mental health provider. Some people will benefit from having access to exercise classes. So, my advice there is just have a lot of different variety.
Okay. We have covered a lot. Before we'll see if there's any final questions, but as we get close to wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to share, or anything that we missed or should stay tuned for as we think about this new work environment and the benefits and mental health that we need to take into consideration?
Can't think of anything. I'm sure I'll think of something after we hang up, but no, I can't think of anything. I mean, it's going to be very interesting how organizations, how this plays out. So I think we need to just watch this space. Yeah.
Well, Sandi, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with us about the trends and about ways that we can be mindful in that work-life balance, and just what your observations have been. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out our WooStream playlist on Willamette's YouTube page. We'd love to hear your suggestions for alumni, faculty, or guests that we should connect with, or topics that we should pursue. You can email us at the alumni team at Willamette. Sorry, email address is alumni@willamette.edu. Thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.